Well, in order to understand factoring, you first have to really understand multiplication. So in section 5.4, where we're factoring polynomials, and by the way, this is one of the most significant sections that we'll do for a while. Anytime we math teachers get together and talk about concerns that we have from people coming up from younger grades, it's their inability to be able to factor that holds them back the most in some of the upper level mathematics. So really put some emphasis on this when you go through this. And so to understand the factoring well, we're going to talk a little bit more about the multiplication. When I have two binomials being multiplied together, the way, of course, that we do that is we use that word FOIL to remember, to help us remember what to do and how to do it. Now, all FOIL is, there's nothing mathematical about it. If you remember, FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. And the idea is, when you multiply these together, you're distributing. You're going to take the 2 and you're going to distribute it to both of those terms. You're going to take the x and you're going to distribute it to both of those terms. Well, when you take the x and you multiply it times the first x here, that's the f, the first ones. So when I go x times x, I get x squared. When I go x times 5, I get plus 5x. That was the outer ones. Now when I do the inner ones, negative 2 times x, I get negative 2x, and then negative 2 times 5 is negative 10. And almost always when you multiply the binomials together like this, there's going to be some like terms that can be added. And so we end up with x squared plus, well, 5 minus 2 is 3x, and then minus 10. But the real question of this section is not how do I go from the factored version to the multiplied out version, but how do I go backwards? So if we were starting here, how do I get back to that? So x squared plus 3x minus 10. Let's take that expression, x squared minus 3x minus 10. Make sure I copied it right. Yeah, plus 3x, sorry. I suddenly didn't think that was right. And let's see if I can get back to the other one. So the question for this would be to factor. Now remember, factors are the things that multiply together. So you're trying to figure out how to get the things that multiply together. But know that they're in this form, that two binomials multiply together to give you this trinomial. So I always start with two empty binomials. Now I think about what would have multiplied together to give me the very first thing. Well, the only option to get x squared is going to be x times x. Now, pretending I don't know the answer, I then take a look at the L. The L, the last one, what are the things that multiply together to give me 10? Well, the problem is there's more than one option. I could have 2 times 5, but I could also have 1 times 10. But then you need to think about, how do I get this middle term? Now, by the way, keep in mind that the 10 down here is negative, so one of these needs to be negative and one of those needs to be positive. Well, do you see that using the 2 and the 5, if the 5 were positive and the 2 were negative, remember how back here, I'm backing up a step, remember how these guys added together? Well, what I'm looking for is what adds together to give me 3. So I realize that the 1 and the 10 don't add together to give me 3, so I'm going to put the 2 and the 5 in. And then really realizing that the middle term needs to be positive, so I want the bigger number, the 5, to be the positive term for the last one. So double checking, right? X times x is x squared. X times 5 is 5x, minus 2x would be 3x, and then negative 2 times 5 would be negative 10. So the factored version of that is there. Let's take a look at another one of those. I'm going to FOIL this out. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x, negative 4x, and then plus 12. And so the final answer would be x squared minus 7x plus 12. Now, of course, the question would be, if I start here, how do I get back to that? So pretend you don't see that up there. I would look at this and realize it's a trinomial and that if it factors, it's going to factor into two binomials. Well, what are the things that give me x squared? Well, I need an x times an x. What are the things that give you 12 at the end? Well, now I've got a whole bunch of options here. Let me go off to the side here and take a look at that. to 12, I could have 1 times 12, I could have 2 times 6, I could have 3 times 4. Keeping in mind that the 12 is positive, that means both of these need to be the same sign. But notice that the middle term's negative, so I need to multiply together and be positive 12, but add together and be negative 7. So I can multiply two negatives together, and two negatives would multiply together and give me positive 12. And as I play around with this, the negative 3 and the negative 4 are going to work to give me the negative 7 in the middle. Now it gets a little different when there's not a 1 in both of these spots. So if I FOIL this out, I get 2x squared, then 2x times 3 is plus 6x, and then negative 1 times x is negative x, and negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. And when I add that together, I've got 2x squared, plus 5x, and minus 3. Now remember back here, let me back up a second, how I could figure out what multiplied together to give me 12, but add together to give me 7, and that worked in each of the previous ones? Well, now something's different. The only thing that multiplies together to give me 3 is 1 and 3. But 1 and 3 don't add up to 5 in the middle. And so the idea here is that when you are multiplying, before I used the 3 in the middle, I ended up being multiplied by the 2. So I can't, when the coefficient, this leading coefficient is something other than a 1, I can't just look to see what multiplies together here and adds together there. So now I have to play around with it a little bit more. There's a little bit of guess and check to this. But the logic starts off the same. What are the options to get 2x squared? Well, the only choice would be 2x times x. What are the options to get 3? Well, the only choice here is 1 and 3. Now, I'm purposely going to do this wrong just to show you how I would guess and check at it possibly. So I'm going to put a 3 and a 1 in here and see what happens. So when I do that, let me check to see if it works. Now, to get a negative 3, one of them has to be negative and one of them has to be positive. So I'm just going to put a plus and minus in and see if this works out. Now, 2x times x gives me 2x squared. I don't really need to check that one. That's why I picked those numbers. Let's check the outer ones. That would be negative 2x. And then the inner ones would give me plus 3x. And then the last one would give me negative 3. And when I combine, get like terms together, do you see that these two would add up to 1x? So the answer there would be 2x squared plus x minus 3. Well, I got the 2x squared, I got the minus 3, but I didn't get what I needed in the middle. So this combination wasn't correct. So I need to back out of that and change that. So let's make that go away. And let me back up to here. Now, notice something. I don't need to change the first and the last because I'm not going to mess with those. Those are going to stay the same when I change my factors around. Watch and see here. So I have currently a 3 here and a 1 there. I'm going to change their positions and see what happens. So I'm going to put the 1 here and the 3 there. So now when I multiply, notice that 2x times x is still 2x squared, and 1 times negative 3 is still negative 3. But in the outer ones, that gives me negative 6x, and the inner ones give me plus 1x. And now when I add those terms together, I get negative 5x in the middle. Well, I'm supposed to get positive 5x in the middle. So when I have the right number but the wrong sign, all I need to do then is change the sign to make it work out. And so now I've got the correct factors of this polynomial. So there's a little bit of guess and check. The thing that runs differently is if there's a number out front here that's not a 1. It's not just what multiplies together to give you 3 and adds together 5, because the 3 ended up getting multiplied by the 2 before it got added. So I hope that helps you figure out how to go about doing this and gives you a little insight into the factoring.